Chair, fellow members and guests. What did they do for us? Is what I want to know. Well, who's not seen the life of Brian? What did the Romans do for us? And there was a little litany of all the things the Romans had actually done for the Jews. Now the same applies to the Chinese. The Chinese, them over the way off. They were doing things that our lot were still in caves. For instance, how about paper? They invented paper 3000 BC. 3000 BC. They'd messed around with all sorts of things. Beaten bark, reeds, you name it. But paper, they finally got it right, and they could print on it, because that was the next thing. They invented printing. Not only did they invent printing, they'd started off with blocks, so you'd carve your block and stamp it on the paper. Looks good, but took too long, far too long. He then invented movable type. It's what we used for many years. The Gutenberg Bible, for instance, was done on movable type. And that's a big difference between 500 BC, which was the Chinese movable type, and I think it's 14 something for Gutenberg. But they got movable type, and it worked. One other offshoot, though, that came from paper. This was about 200 AD. This happened. I mean, it's ridiculous. So it took them until 200 AD to do this. But the emperor and his court used paper to wipe their bums. And up until then it was soap, water in your hand, which is what left hand, of course. You never do it with your right, because your right is used for eating. But anyway, they then decided that the emperor and his court could use it for that, which was pretty good, really. We still, I think, use things like grass while they were using paper. So what else do you think they did? Something really, really good. You've heard of a compass, haven't you? All heard of compasses? They're not the ones you use for drawing, but it points to north. Right, well, Chinese being different, of course, their compass pointed south. They did it with a lodestone, right? So they had a lodestone and a pointer, and the thing always pointed south. Why? Well, it was feng shui, wasn't it? They needed to know where south was. So when they set up the feng shui, they could know exactly which part of the room was south, and so they could then align all the objects in the room. Which just seems a bit of a waste, really, to spend all that time and inventing to do that. But then some bright spark said, hang on here, we don't need to use the stars, do we? We can use this thing, this always points south. And so they put it onto the boat. And then they had another problem. The boat moves, doesn't it? And so the thing was all over the place. That's where the gimbal came from. There's two units that would move and keep the pointer steady while everything else was moving around them, which is current ships have got them. Their compass is mounted in the gimbal, so that the actual lever and pointer can be seen at all times flat rather than tipping over, because if they tip over they just lose their position, so you know where you're going. You've got absolutely no idea. So that's another brilliant one, compass. Now, this is one for the, well, not quite for the ladies. This is a sort of, well, before I get into that bit, let's think about what really happened. You're wealthy, yes, you're wealthy. How do you show it? Africa, where I spent many years, norm was to be obese, in fact, morbidly obese. Because if you were huge, you must have money to be able to feed yourself like that. So, you got fat. And I can remember the guy that was my driver in Kigali, he was huge. But when the guys coming into the place where we were sitting working, they all assumed that the guy sitting with me was the driver and the big fat guy was the boss. China, what do? Fingernails. If you were wealthy, you did not work. Therefore, you let your fingernails grow and grow and grow and grow. 10-inch, 20-inch, incredible length these things went to. And they kept breaking. So what did they do? They invented nail varnish. And so they got this nail varnish with gums so that they could paint it onto the nails and give them some support so they didn't break. So that was, 2000 BC that was done. It was ridiculous. But, you know, we've done it, we've got our own nail varnish, we've got a lot better, but it came from China. Now this one you will not believe. Tomato ketchup. It was called ketchup, and it was 17th century. They'd made it, and they used it, and it contained spices and anchovies. It moved across to Indonesia, and they added more, like tomatoes. And it moved across to Europe, out go the anchovies, in go more tomatoes, and you have tomato ketchup. You know, taken from the Chinese in the 17th century. What else did they do? What else? Fireworks. Everyone messed up fireworks. But they had a handheld cannon. Can you imagine having a cannon on a bit of stick and having a lighter and going, and it goes off, blow your arm off? But, you know, they had handheld cannons, they had mortars, they had grenades, they had rifles, they had rockets, all carrying explosives. And they even had some bombs that contained chemical and biological weapons. Bits of dead bodies that were rotting inside a bomb, fire it off, and you give everybody disease. So, yeah, they were brilliant. Killing people, that was one of their favourites. Now, since there are so many I really can't go into, I better finish off on something really clever. Mechanical clock. You know how complex these mechanical clocks are that go round and round, or the pendulum goes backwards and forwards? The Chinese invented that in 1000 BC. Just think what they could have done if they hadn't shut themselves down and become very isolated.
Thank you, Brian. It's always amazing, really, how we sort of, what might seem the most mundane fact has something hidden behind it, and Brian knows it. You know, he's very common about Beatlemania. Who'd have thought that? But it must have been widely known at the time. And all these great inventions, again, there's more to it that nobody knows, but Brian does. So in all his speeches, I think we can always say that we're going to be informed, and because of, I think, his delivery and the sort of the surprise of what he has to say, we're always going to be entertained as well. So thank you, Brian. That's